In the summer of 2016, my parents often went on holidays, and I used to stay home alone for 2 weeks to look after our dogs and take care of the garden. I've always been a bit scared because of my experiences of being followed home a few times. My neighborhood was still new at the time and was surrounded by forests, so sometimes I would see junkies hanging around there while walking home from the shops. Even though I had some worries, I usually felt safe at home with my four big dogs. Nothing ever really happened because most of my neighbors were my dad's friends, so it gave me a strong feeling of safety. Our house was surrounded by a big fence with little spikes on top, making it almost impossible to climb over without getting hurt. The first couple of days were fine, and nothing strange happened except for some thuds I heard in the garden, but I didn't think much of it since it was usually just martins messing with my mom's flowers. And it happened so often that even my dogs ignored it. Then, after 2 days, I finally needed to go to the shops. Because I was busy all day, I had to go in the evening when it was starting to get dark. As I walked home, texting on my phone, I noticed a guy I just passed suddenly stand up from a bench and start walking behind me. I thought maybe he was someone from my neighborhood I didn't know and he was just heading in the same direction. I left the forest and came out onto a regular road where the houses start. The guy was still following me, and I realized he wasn't one of my neighbors. I started to feel very scared, but fortunately my neighbor who lives to the left of my house was outside watering his plants and saw me as I walked by. He started talking to me because he noticed I looked stressed and knew my parents were out of town. When the guy following me saw my neighbor, he quickly ran back toward the forest. I called my parents to tell them what happened, but they reassured me that I had nothing to worry about, saying our neighborhood is safe and I had my dogs with me. I tried to calm down and carry on as usual. That night I was lying in bed reading a book and my dogs were soundly asleep with me. Suddenly I heard a thud from outside, like something tapping on the window in the room next to mine. I thought it was just martins again, but this time my dog started growling at the window in my bedroom. After a few seconds of silence, there was another thud, this time on the window in my bedroom. I started to panic, but I tried to stay calm. The third thud was louder, and it was clear someone was banging on every window of the house. I was crying, knowing exactly what was happening. I saw a dark figure outside my main door, peeking inside and banging on the small window. I moved out of sight, hiding under the table, and took out my phone while still hearing the man trying to break the glass. I called my dad, but he didn't answer. I then tried calling my mom, and she could hear the man banging on the door and trying to open it with his whole body. My neighbor who talked to me earlier that day was the first to arrive and scare the guy away. The man ran to my back garden, but I was still too scared to open the main door. About 10 minutes later, my uncle, aunt, and grandma arrived. And my uncle had a key, so he opened the door and let my dogs out to chase after the intruder. My uncle and neighbor went into the backyard with flashlights along with my dogs to check every corner and make sure it was safe. I will never forget how my grandma and aunt came to me while I was crying and holding onto a chair. The man had escaped through the back of the garden into my other neighbor's garden, probably trying to get away from my dogs. He did manage to damage the small window in my main door, and the glass was cracked, and the door itself was loose on its hinges. I don't want to think about what might have happened if they hadn't arrived at my house so quickly. This incident took place around 5 years ago when I was living in a nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as a technician. I got home from work at my usual time around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door, and went inside. I then put my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen counter. I heard the heavy front door slam shut behind me and started doing some chores around the house. Growing up in a small town, I was used to not locking my door during the day, especially since my husband would be home soon. However, ever since that day, I've never forgotten to lock my door once in the last 5 years. I walked through my bathroom into my big walk-in closet and started hanging up the laundry I had started earlier before work. Then I heard my front door open, and I smiled, thinking my husband must have come home early. So I happily called out, "I'm in here, love," but when I didn't get a response, I started to feel uneasy. I then walked out into the living room and kitchen area to check, and standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a man I didn't know. He looked older than me, probably in his 50s, but I don't remember his exact features because I was so shocked. He was just standing there staring at me with a blank expression. I thought he might have accidentally walked into the wrong apartment and would apologize and leave, but when he continued to stare without moving, I knew I had to take action. I tried to stand up straight and puff out my chest to look more imposing, even though it's challenging for someone my size. I took a deep breath and used a loud, firm voice to tell him to get out of my apartment and that he had no right to be there. My heart was pounding and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I spoke, but he completely ignored me, acting like I hadn't said anything at all. Then he started picking up my things, my cell phone, keys, and wallet, and putting each item into his pockets, watching me as he did so. Seeing him do this, it suddenly hit me that he was a real threat, so I rushed toward my laptop. The only other way I had to get help. I had to get a bit closer to the intruder to reach it, but we were still about 12 to 15 FT apart, so I thought I could grab it and run before he could catch me. As I picked up the laptop and turned to run, I saw him starting to move towards me. I sprinted back to the bathroom because it was the only place where I could put two locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed the first door shut and locked it, and within seconds I could hear him trying to open it. I quickly ran into the closet and locked that door too. I opened my laptop, got on Facebook Messenger, and started sending message after message to my husband telling him to call 911 and let them know there was an intruder in the apartment. Fortunately, he got my messages within minutes and assured me he had called 911 and was leaving work to come help if he could. Suddenly, I heard the bathroom door creak open and the intruder walked in. He started pounding on the closet door, trying to break it down. I was frozen with fear and shock. I didn't scream, cry, or look for a weapon in the dark closet. I didn't try to brace the door or hold it shut. People often tell me that since I lived in an apartment, someone would have heard me scream and come to help, or that there must have been something heavy in my closet that I could have used to defend myself. But I don't really have an answer for why I didn't do anything. Somehow the closet door held strong. I heard the intruder's frustrated footsteps move back out into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, and my drawers, refrigerator, and cabinets being thrown open as stuff was pulled out. I stayed in the closet, crying quietly. I felt bad about how I acted in that moment, but I still messaged my mom, who lived 15 hours away, to tell her what was happening. I really wanted comfort and needed to tell her how much I loved her. Then the front door opened again, and it was my husband shouting for me. The intruder walked back toward the living room and kitchen area where the front door was. I quickly opened the closet door and ran out to see my husband on the ground with the intruder holding him down. The man kept mumbling and sometimes yelling, but he didn't really try to fight back much. Eventually, the police arrived, but it took them about 25 minutes to get to the apartment. I was shocked by how long it took, as in those moments, time seemed to stretch out endlessly, and I had thought the wait was shorter. The officers managed to recover my belongings from the intruder and took him out of my apartment. I then had to go through the process of filing a police report detailing everything that had happened. Within 30 minutes, the scariest moment of my life was over, but I've carried the fear and anxiety with me for years. Knowing that someone could intrude into my space once makes me worry it could happen again. The last half of 2017 has been really exhausting for me. The biggest challenge, both emotionally and physically, was moving my father into an aged care facility because his health was declining rapidly. It was a hard decision, but he needed more care than I could provide on my own. He lives in Tasmania, where I grew up, and visiting him regularly became difficult since I now live and work in Brisbane. The distance between the two cities is about 1,500 miles, which made the process even more draining as I had to travel back and forth several times to make all the arrangements. I've been flying to Tasmania, which is a 3.5-hour trip about twice a month, to take care of my dad's situation. His house is old and in bad shape, so I've been keeping busy fixing it up to get it ready to sell. I've moved out all of his furniture and belongings except for a pile of blankets and pillows that I keep there. I use them to make a makeshift bed on the floor whenever I stay overnight. The house is in a semi-rural area surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. It's an old, damp house, and everything creaks. There's no electricity right now, so it feels a bit creepy at night. The house isn't very secure either. There's no alarm system, and while the doors have locks, they can be easily pushed open with a strong nudge. I flew in on Christmas Eve in the evening and picked up my rental car for the hour-long drive to my dad's house. Before heading there, I stopped by a friend's place who lives about 10 minutes away from my dad's house. We had a few drinks and talked about how the year had gone. We laughed and shared stories for a couple of hours. Then, after a while, I realized I had probably had too much to drink to safely drive the rest of the way. So my friend's wife gave me a ride to my dad's house, and even offered to come back the next morning to take me back to their place to get my car. I got to my dad's house around midnight, and it was completely dark inside. Still a bit tipsy, I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Then I remembered there was no power. Using my phone as a flashlight to guide me through the dark house, I noticed that some tools I had left lying around were missing. The house had been empty for a while, so it was probably just some local kids who saw that no one was around and decided to take the opportunity to grab what they could. Even though it was unsettling to know that someone had been in the house, I didn't call the police for a hammer, wrench, and screwdriver. The good news was that the big toolbox, which I keep locked up in the laundry cupboard and holds my more expensive power tools, was still there and in one piece. However, the padlock and the area around it were scratched and dented, like someone had tried to force it open. Feeling exhausted, I went into one of the empty bedrooms and used the blankets and pillows to make a makeshift bed on the floor. I couldn't settle down, and it was taking me a while to fall asleep. As I lay there in the dark, the only sounds I could hear over the constant ringing in my ears were the soft rustling of the wind through the trees outside. Then suddenly I heard what sounded like boots crunching on the gravel driveway that runs along the side of the house. I tried to listen more closely when I suddenly heard a loud bang, like something solid hitting the metal railing leading up to the back door. It startled me, and I sat up with my heart racing. I wondered if it could be a wave or a possum making the noise. I stayed as still as possible, straining to hear any other sounds. Then I was startled by the pop and squeak of the back door being pushed open. I froze, not sure what to do. I could hear footsteps creaking through the house and then the sound of the laundry cupboard being opened. I was at the far end of the hallway, but I could hear whispering. I tried to stay calm, took out my phone, and called the police. I talked to the dispatcher while hiding my head under a pillow to muffle my voice. I explained what was happening, and she said the police were on their way. While this was happening, I heard a clanging sound like someone was trying to break the lock on the toolbox. The dispatcher suggested that I lock the door of the room I was in, and I agreed. As I slowly walked across the room to the door, one of the floorboards creaked loudly. I froze, and then heard complete silence from the laundry. It seemed to work in my favor because I then heard the intruders quickly leave through the back door. I locked the bedroom door and told the dispatcher that I thought they were gone. She told me to stay put until the police arrive, and I said I was more than happy to do that. After about 5 minutes, the police arrived. They searched the area but didn't find anything, which I had already expected. One of the cops said the intruders probably broke in earlier, took what they could, tried to open the toolbox but couldn't, and then left to get something to open it with while I came home, and then they came back to try again. I stayed up until sunrise and then got a couple of hours of sleep before my friend's wife came to pick me up to get my car. I asked if I could keep my tools at their place for safekeeping, and they agreed. I then drove to my dad's care home and had Christmas lunch with him and his new friends. The next day, I went to a hardware store and bought some new, stronger door locks. With the new locks installed, I felt more secure, knowing the house was better protected